we've had a reaction from the Chancellor this morning. He says that the figures show that the government's case is right to stick to its guns. I sense you don't disagree.
Well, I'm not sure what sticking to the guns mean in this context. Does it mean that we're going to continue to see food price inflation run through the way that we have that has an impact on people's mortgages? It's making the cost of living crisis even harder for working people. That isn't what people want. The people expect the government will take action on the biggest issue of the day when it comes to working people. And that is, it doesn't matter how hard you work, it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet.
What should the government be doing, though? What, for example, would you like Jeremy Hunt to be saying to the banks today?
Well, it's for the government to have a strategy for dealing with the underlying causes of the inflation. So if we work backwards, we can see, of course, that we're feeling it in our mortgage payments, or if you're a renter, the landlord's will pass it on to you. But that's because food price inflation is running at a rate of knots. We need to kind of unpick that for the component parts of what's causing that.
Food inflation is coming down. I mean, yes, it's still high, but it did come down yesterday.
It's stubbornly high, and to be clear, it's not coming down, it's just not increasing as much. So when you're going to the supermarket, you will see that the food you're purchasing is more and more expensive because of that. What that means in practice is that working people are paying £1,000 a year more for the food that they have to eat. People are making choices to cut back on the foods they eat. Some parents are skipping meals entirely. More people are going to the food bank, but the donations at the food bank are decreasing because of it. And they look to the government for an answer. And what they find constantly is, one, they're either missing in action or they are so slow to take action that, you know, we're just not seeing the progress that we need. So it's for Rishi Sunak and for the Chancellor to get together now and say what practical action are they going to take, not just to deal with the consequence of inaction, but the actual underlying causes that's driving up food prices.
What practical action do you think they should take?
Well, they can deal with labour, they can deal with the cost pressures when it comes to energy for those intensive uses, like greenhouses, like bakeries and other food producers. They can deal with the feed issue. And just listen to the experts. You know, you've got the National Farmers Union who are saying, we know our industry and we know what's needed to fix it. Just help us on that journey. And the government are completely missing in action. They're actually blaming the farmers. You've got retailers who are saying, we can see where the cost pressures are coming on transport, on energy, on labour, work with us to find a solution. And the government just don't even meet them halfway. And so it's for the government now to step up, to show leadership, because working people cannot afford that £1,000 Tory penalty on their food shopping bill.
Mortgage rates are going up. We're expecting an interest rate decision tomorrow. But for savers, bank interest rates aren't really going up at the same rate. Should Jeremy Hunt be telling the banks to give something back to those who are lucky enough to have some savings? Well,
it's clearly not a fair deal, is it? If you're a mortgage payer, you're paying absolutely through the nose for the mortgages because of the failure of the Tories to take action on the economy. But banks and building societies aren't then passing that on to savers who have built up a nest egg and who are expecting at times when interest rates are higher that they'll get the benefits of that. And I think it is right that the Chancellor looks at whether the banks are playing fairly or not.
Let me just ask you something about the Labour Party. We spoke to Keir Starmer earlier in the week on this programme, and he was very critical of what's happened with Boris Johnson and his list. But, you know, and he said that he wouldn't be giving his own list as an outgoing Prime Minister of Honours. But, you know, you are going to need more Labour peers in the Lords to get bills through. So, you know, the fact that Labour is still going to be pushing peers into the Lords, is this just another sign of Labour saying one thing and perhaps doing another?
You cannot compare Boris Johnson's disgraced resignation honours list with the legitimate business of passing legislation in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. We have two chambers, the Commons where MPs are sent and the Lords that of course provide that check and balance and scrutiny, and that's important, and you need that for government to function. That's quite different than Boris Johnson, who's awarded his cronies, awarded people who were in the scandal of lockdown parties. Literally, while the deaths were being announced on the evening news, they were holding parties, getting drunk and eating cake. That isn't right, and it's actually brought the honours system into further disrepute. Now, Rishi Sunak had the opportunity to take action, to show leadership, to show that he meant what he said when he would have a government of integrity and accountability, and he failed to do that. In the end, this comes down to Rishi Sunak's weakness.
But will the Labour Party still continue to appoint peers until Labour perhaps get in?
But we, of course, need to make sure that we have an allocation in the Lords, and any government would have to do that. Any opposition actually makes nominations as well. Of course, we have an ambition to replace the House of Lords with an elected chamber, and that will come. But on day one, you are going to have a functioning House of Commons in the Lords and the Commons, and to do that. But to be absolutely clear, not everybody in the House of Lords is mired in scandal. They do a decent job at making sure that we have a functioning second chamber for the benefit of the country. It's been disgraced because of the likes of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak that have allowed people who were not suitable to be elected there.
Now, you are the Shadow Environment Secretary, and you've come in today to talk about the Animal Welfare Bill. You're trying to bring that back into the government. Why is it important to your party to get that back in?
Well, it's important for Labour. It's also important, actually, for the Conservatives, because it was in their 2019 election manifesto that they would bring forward protections for the animals that the nation loves. You know, we are a nation of animal lovers. They are not objects. They are not possessions. You know, if you're a dog or a cat owner, they're part of the family. And the Tories recognised that in 2019, which is why they made that promise. And all we're doing today is to say it's about time for integrity, for trust in politics, that when politicians make a promise, they actually stick to it. So we're giving the Tories an opportunity today to meet their promise. It's already passed second reading, actually without any division at all. There was overwhelming support for it. There is no reason not to take it forward. And I just hope that enough Conservative MPs who really care about animal welfare, who care about keeping those election promises, come with Labour today.
We've seen a lot of protest groups, though, that do care about animal welfare, but taking direct action at things like the Epsom Derby and the Grand National. Labour's been accused this week of being the political arm of Just Stop Oil. Are you also now representing Animal Rising as well?
Well, on this bill, you could argue, probably more accurately, that Labour is the political arm of the Conservative Party when it comes to delivering their manifesto, because it was the Tories who promised the Kept Animals Bill. It's Labour that's having to bring it back with the Tories dragging and screaming for them to keep their own election promise. We are the party of animal welfare. Labour's got a very proud record of animal welfare because we recognise that we're a nation of animal lovers. But to be clear, this is a Tory promise that they have tried to break, that we're holding them to account for. And it's important today for Conservative MPs that went out on that manifesto to say, I'm going to be accountable. I'm going to vote for the very bill that I promised I'd deliver.